Access Condos, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about something that I've spent a lot of time on in the past 12 months, researching, visiting, investing in, and that's Calgary. Now, I know a lot of you, when you first heard us approach you and mention Calgary, you're like, Calgary? Why Calgary? Isn't Toronto the center of the universe in Canada? And it is. Toronto is the center of the Canadian universe. There is no doubt about that. But Toronto is also becoming very expensive. And this webinar is almost like a public service announcement. It's kind of like I'm the Good Samaritan and I'm giving back to my fellow citizens and the people that listen to us, work with us, confide in us, trust us with their family's financial future. And I'm basically telling you guys that for a lot of us, it's time to stand in front of a mirror and ask ourselves something. And that this is a heart to heart and say, can I afford Toronto right now? Right now, in October of 2023, can I afford investing in Toronto real estate? And if the answer is no, then it's time to say the follow-up question, which is, do I want to be a real estate investor? And if the answer is yes to that question, and the answer was no to buying Toronto right now, then you need to tell yourself that you are never going to afford Toronto. You're never going to be able to invest here because right now rates are at their highest. And when rates are at their highest, prices are at their lowest. Life is cyclical. Economies are cyclical. Interest rate cycles are cyclical. And at the peak of rates, prices are at the lowest. And prices are not coming down anymore. And rates are not going up anymore. And yes, there might be a 0.25 increase because the BOC dances to the beat of their own drummer without no rhyme or reason. I've been against interest rate hikes. I've been against interest rate hikes from the start. Every time we've seen inflation, interest rate hikes were not what brought the inflation down, especially this one. We have inflation because of the largest printing of money ever in our country and around the world, and serious supply chain issues due to COVID and the mismanagement by the majority of governments across the world during the COVID pandemic. Now, I'm not going to go into my opinions of that. My opinions are based on facts and statistics, zero emotion. So there's no point in me getting into it because it upsets some people that, like to be governed by their emotions and the media. But the reality is that government mismanagement and basically a shutting down of the world caused serious supply chain issues, which led to difficulties in shipping product, which led to shortages, which led to price increases. And then when you flood the economy with new money, it devalues that currency because money is a commodity. And like commodities, the greater the amount of a commodity in a market, the lower the cost because it is less valuable. And those two things combined caused inflation. And then you started seeing futures, hedge funds betting on future oil and gas futures to go up. That further increased inflation because everything is transported with diesel. That's it. So when diesel costs go up, everything goes up. And I know the Bank of Canada doesn't like to say, and a lot of central banks don't like to say that, but now we saw a drop in oil and gas prices. They basically tanked, futures tanked. The nosedive slowed a little bit due to the conflict in the Middle East, which I'm not touching on because that's been an issue, that area, for thousands of years. And there's nothing I say or my opinion doesn't matter because it's going to go on regardless of what anybody does. And it's 100% unfortunate, but that's not a big enough crisis to really stop the dive in gas futures. And what we're going to see is an end to interest rate hikes. If it's not on October 25th, we're not going to see a drop in rates on December because the Bank of Canada thinks we're spending too much money. And God forbid we spend a lot around the holiday season. But I predict, and this is solely my prediction and my gut feeling, from the hours and hours of research I do on this topic, that we're going to see it very early on in 2024. So when that happens, because remember, our inflation, over 1/3 of it is caused by interest rate hikes. And then essentially a quarter of that is by high gas prices. Now, our carbon tax has something to do with that. And I don't understand why the country with the most trees on the planet and so little pollution in comparison to the rest of the world has a tax for carbon. Next, there's going to be a climate tax, but I won't get into that either. But in reality, those three things, it's mostly just gas because that's where carbon tax really hits. It's high gas prices and high interest rates are driving inflation. So when gas prices come down, our inflation target will be achieved. There'll be no reason for more interest rate hikes, and I predict that we are going to see interest rates drop. Once they drop, the market in Toronto is going to catapult. We saw a glimpse of this after 2 rate pauses earlier this year. After the second rate pause, we had a lot of activity real estate-wise in April, May, and June. And then we had a rate hike in June, and it tanked again. Summer traditionally slow, but it hasn't picked up since. Okay. Now, in comparison, there are 2 markets in our country which are up sales volume wise and up price point wise. Anybody want to guess? Well, they're Calgary and Edmonton. And Edmonton is way behind Calgary, so that's not even a thought for me based on my investment criteria and how long I hold and when I sell. Okay. But Calgary is the jewel of Canada at the moment. And although it's not Toronto, that's kind of what makes it appealing. Okay. It is a Cinderella story about their rise, their decline. And when a government works together and puts a plan in place and then executes said plan to perfection, Calgary is what can happen. So what we do here at First Access Condos is we want to give you and ourselves, I'm a real estate investor first, an educator and mentor second, and I'd say a real estate investment consultant third, okay? What we want to do is give you these opportunities. And for the vast majority of you that are realizing that you may not be able to buy any more here in the GTA now, and you definitely won't a year from now, okay? It's okay. We have found an alternative market, a market that is about to boom, is on the path to boom. So remember I say either invest in a AAA location or invest in an area that's about to take off. Calgary's that area that's about to take off. So to put it in perspective, Toronto's going to be the blue chip, okay, of the country, where you know it's going to appreciate, nothing's going to happen. But the profit margins aren't going to be what they used to be in comparison to a place that's up and coming like Calgary. So without further ado, I'm going to get in. I'm going to talk about some elephants in the room that we've all had, okay? And then we're going to get right into Calgary. I'm going to give you a background about what happened in this great city. I'm going to talk about the fall first, and then I'm going to talk about the rise, and then I'm going to talk about where we are now. So it'll be like a great story, okay? And I'm going to narrate it, and you just follow, be entertained. But at the end, because we are here to make money, okay? We're just not here to learn, but we're here to make money. I'm going to talk about a great relationship that I just fused when I was in Calgary a few weeks ago, okay? We're going to talk about some spectacular projects, and then we're going to end it with some real numbers so that you can see the returns, and then you can partake in this joyous time of investing in Calgary. Calgary is the time machine buy where we jump into a time machine. We go back to 2015, we get in, and then once built, we are going to be laughing all the way to the bank. So let's start. Okay, so let me make my screen so I can see this. Okay, so we have 3 elephants in the room, and one of them is our are property prices going to drop? Are we at the peak? Are we going to see a bubble burst? And everybody should know, and hopefully anyone listening to me that's heard me speak before should realize that we're not in a bubble. Okay, we have housing prices based on supply and demand, that are founded by an inability to produce enough housing, coupled with the largest immigration to our city we've seen ever. Okay, so we can't build enough, and we have great population boom, and also it is exactly similar to the money supply graph, which I'm not going to talk about because that's getting, it's getting a little sideways and I don't want to complicate things. But what we see on this graph is a constant rise from after 2000 to 2020. Now, we did see some bubble action and we had a slight bubble, okay, in 2021. And then interest rates came up and that dropped, but there was no real reason for significant spikes. So besides a spike in the late 2000s, which was the worst recession that we've seen since our lifetime, okay? And for most of us, I was a little bit older, but I saw a couple more, but I just don't remember them. I was really young. But that was really where we saw a drop, and that was a drop up and before 2008, 2009. And then we see price increases. So I know I like to not speak very favorably of Trudeau and the Liberals, but they are not the reason house prices started raising in Canada. That actually started happening to Harper, and I think Harper was a fantastic prime minister, and also think Mark Carney was the best governor of the Bank of Canada we've ever had. Okay, and it was during their time that we saw a spike in home prices, and that's when we really started seeing Toronto becoming a magnet for immigration and Canada becoming a magnet for immigration. So I want you guys to see home prices across the country. They've been gradually increasing since 2000, and it's a steep, steady incline. And there's been some pops of bubbles, but these weren't bubbles in a sense that the media likes to portray. And, your friend down the street, the doom and gloom guy, likes to say house prices are going to drop 50%. It's not going to happen. And people should stop thinking about that. And especially when you're dealing with the one market who has defied the norm countrywide, as in Calgary. Like, they're kicking ass and taking names when the rest of the country lost 10% of its value. Okay, that's huge. So I want you guys to just pay attention to that, and then we're going to go to the next slide and talk a little bit more. Now, housing shortages in Canada. This is a chart created by the CMHC, okay? And they're going to talk about how price increases are going to double in some regions. This is provincial, and I don't like provincial graphs because Canada is one of the largest countries on the planet, depending on who you ask. We're either number one or number two in the land mass. And these provinces, some of them are half the size of Europe, okay? Which means they have one or two cities. Some of them have no densely populated areas by worldly comparison. They're towns, okay? And the rest of the province is pretty much barren. So, like, Ontario is going to double by 2030. Alberta is going to increase by 50%. But when you're looking at what's happening into Calgary, okay, when their house prices are up over 10% across the board, while the rest of the country was down 10%, and their sales volumes up 26% when the rest of the country was down significantly as well, I think these numbers don't really give an accurate account. Regardless, on a low point, even if they go up by 1.5%, because Calgary only requires a 10% down payment, that actually works out to a similar percentage return as you'd be getting here in Ontario. But the difference is it's costing you less than half of what Toronto costs. So next chart. And this one's my favorite coming up, okay? We have heard recently that rates are going to be higher for longer. I call BS on this. Big time. And I haven't been wrong. I'm not the best to take relationship advice from, as people know, but I have not been wrong about my housing predictions in the house market. Okay. I predicted everything that happened to our market during COVID. I didn't start selling Calgary till I did a lot of research. I planted some seeds and let everybody know we were going to start doing it in the spring. And until I went, I shook hands with who's now a friend of mine and the best developer, probably one of top 5 across the country. Okay, I'm not really pushing Calgary until now. I did my research. I did research for us. I went and visited a couple times. I saw what was happening, touched it, felt it, smelt it, kissed it, and now we're investing. Okay, but let's look at this. What is this? Well, this chart shows interest rate hikes and drops by the Bank of Canada over the past 20 years. There's 5 significant rate ups and downs. And every time the Bank of Canada raised rates, they raised it steeply and excessively and later than they should have started. But what they did every single time after was they dropped rates at or below where the raising began. This is also going to happen now. To know what is happening today and to predict the future, you must learn from the past. And that's why I'm a student of history and a student of war. And this basically tells us that we can predict with fairly a bit of certainty that the Bank of Canada and most things in life are cyclical. And the interest rates subsequently are going to come down quickly, in my opinion, early next year. Unless we go into an overall world war, and then all of us will have bigger problems to deal with. Now, I'm joking and not joking, but remember, what is happening in the Middle East happens way too often, and it's not the first time nor the last time. I pray it is the last time, but it probably won't be based on thousands of years in that region. And it's not a big enough conflict to affect the world, okay, in my opinion, and really tank our market. And as there is conflict in other parts of the world, countries that are very, very far away and have a very, very strong economy and are very, very safe, and I'm not pulling a Joe Biden by repeating myself, I'm saying it twice for a reason, okay? They will appeal even more so to immigration. Next step. Speaking of immigration, the target for the next 3 years is almost 1.5 million people. We are going to increase our population by nearly 5% in the next 3 years because we just hit 40. What's not included in this number is the amount of foreign students that we have. And Calgary has multiple universities with a slew of foreign students, okay? Not just Toronto and not just Vancouver. Calgary also is appealing to tens of thousands of foreign students every year. And these numbers will grow. So if it's 1.5 million people coming to Canada in the next 3 years, and Calgary is the fastest growing city currently in Canada at 4%, well, Moncton is a little bit higher percentage-wise, but it's not even really a city, it's more of a large town. So I don't really count that. But when you compare it to Toronto, that's growing in 3% year over year, and everybody's talking about Toronto, Calgary's growing at 4%, and Calgary's actually stealing people from Toronto. So Calgary is going to be experiencing significant population growth, and all it takes is a quick Google to see it, that the rental vacancies are massive. They're actually worse than Toronto, okay? So 1.5 million people plus foreign students coming to Canada in the next 3 years, and a large portion are coming to Calgary. Immigration in 2023 is on track to bust record high targets for next year in 2025. This shows the different streams where people are coming in, okay? So about 20% of people are coming in through refugee or humanitarian means, and they usually get settled in the prairie provinces, okay? Or it used to happen in smaller cities in Ontario, but now when you come here for 2 years, from my understanding, you have to live somewhere where there's not a lot of people, and then you can immigrate somewhere else. But we have over 260,000 people a year coming from the economic stream. We have another 100,000 coming from the family stream, which usually means there's some family here that is working, that can support them, that's bringing them over. So we have 350,000 people a year coming. A large portion of that is going to Calgary now, a significantly larger portion based on its population than almost any other city in Canada. And like I said, the city is booming, but not just with international immigration, not just with foreign students, but that is the place that is getting the most people interprovincially. It used to be Toronto getting 20,000 people a year. Now Calgary's getting that and actually pulling people from other metropolis because it is still affordable, but not much longer. And we're going to have something to do about that because we're going to invest in it. We can estimate 2026 to be at or above 500,000 K. Now, no matter who gets elected and it runs the country next, these immigration numbers will not start. We have a very low birth rate, a booming economy, and we need workers, and we're going to get them from overseas if we don't have them here, which is okay because there is going to be a massive shortage of construction workers countrywide, and that is one of the reasons why we have a housing shortage. Canada's population throughout the years, if we look at around the year 2000, we were just over 30 million, okay. And then in 2023, we increased by 25%. So in 20 years, we saw a 25% increase. That's an increase of almost 1% per year. And now we've seen numbers increase beyond that to 1.52% per year increase. That is a lot, okay? The population is booming. And the reason I keep talking about this slide over slide is to hammer out any nuance of a bubble still in anyone's brain. There is no bubble in the major housing markets in the country. We just can't build them fast enough. And Calgary is a prime example of that. Next slide. I think we talked about it enough. Yeah, next slide. We're going to talk about Alberta. Actually, go back. Alberta experienced the fastest demographic growth among all Canada's 13 provinces and territories, increasing by 4%. This growth is largely thanks to international migration and the increase in people from other parts of the country moving to the province. Alberta led Canada with over 56,000 more people moving into the province than leaving it between July 2022 and July 2023. That's interprovincially, okay? StatsCan notes that 7 provinces also experienced record growth, insignificant to us because they don't have good, strong housing markets ready for investment, okay? And that's it. But remember that paragraph that I just read. That's major. And here's another thing. And I'm going to talk about this later, but I'm going to say it twice. I want to talk about now and later. You can get your PR card. If you study in Alberta and get a job in Alberta, you can get your PR card 3 times faster than Ontario. Imagine the appeal to driven, educated, young individuals from other countries knowing that. Next slide. Calgary's residential benchmark for prices. We've circled the 2 most important parts of this chart, but I'm going to look at one other thing. We saw a skyrocketing of prices from 2005 to 2007. Prices doubled. That was during an oil boom. And then with the recession and the crash of oil prices, Calgary housing took a major hit, not just on the residential side, but the real estate market as a whole, because there was empty office towers. That is when the government created a plan and started acting it. And now we're going to jump to the rest, and I'm going to circle back to that, okay? But I wanted you to visualize it. For those of you that learn visually, not just audibly, okay? I don't even know if I said that word right. But anyways, here we go, and we are going to see what has happened in 2 years. In the past 2 years, post-COVID, started during COVID and now post-COVID, Calgary residential prices have gone up almost 50%. The difference is we saw a major boom, and everything's compared to Toronto, so I'm always going to refer back to us because that's the market we know, okay? So if I'm going to convince you and explain why I invested in Calgary, why my colleagues at my level invest in Calgary, and why many Torontonians have started to invest in Calgary, you got to understand this. We saw a spike here, but then we saw a drop in a correction because house prices skyrocketed in 1 year, unsubstantiated increase. Calgary has continued to increase. They had a bit of a lull, but then they jumped back up. And as the rest of the country is seeing people leave, they are coming here. Next. Now we're going to talk and get into Calgary pre-con. We're going to talk investing in Calgary, but we're going to talk about how Calgary today became the blooming city that's growing better and faster and at a great entry price compared to the rest of Canada. To know or to understand the present and to know the future, we need to look at the past. So we're going to talk about the chaos that ensued in Calgary in 2009. And this is the Calgary that everybody first thinks of. This is the Calgary that's dependent on oil. This is the Calgary that goes from boom to bust, kind of like a gold town in the 1800s, okay? Where they found gold, it would boom, and then there was no more gold and it would bust, okay? Like an oil town. It's an oil town. It's the West. It's the Texas of Canada, right? But let's tell you how their Cinderella story unfolded and began first. 2009, price drop of all energy sources. Disaster for Calgary. Increased cost of oil and gas production, making it worse. High vacancy rate up to 30% for residential and office properties across the board. This is when it became a ghost town. And if you go to Calgary, you can't find any new hotels because they're all from the early 2000s. That's when they were booming. That's when all the hotels were built, and now nothing new's really come. Unemployment rate jumped 6.4%, double that compared to 2008. So that's the year it was, 2009. And net migration, both international and interprovincially, slows, and that's when people started fleeing the city. Sounds apocalyptic? Almost was. But what did they do? Let's see. They lowered taxes and created various provincial programs. Step one. They made significant changes for students as well as the immigration system. Step two. You lower tax it, makes it appealing to business. You create changes for students and immigration system, which brings new blood and a new lifeline to your economic area. Two great ideas. Huge transportation changes. You need to be able to move these people to and from. Three excellent steps here. Four, they created the best conditions for IT companies to grow, as well as educated and invited top human capital for tech jobs. That was the fourth and final step to create the perfect plan. So they made the environment suitable and appealing for new business. They changed the system to make it easier for people to come and study and work there. They increased transportation, public transportation, to make it easier to move people around. And then they made it appealing for the future of industry and innovation. That right there is the recipe for success. And that caused the Calgary of today to be created. In 2016, Calgary had 604,000 people with a post-education, post-secondary degree or other qualification, one of the highest educated cities in the country. That is even higher now. Calgary is the magnet, the brain magnet in our country right now, and is soon going to be comparable to the KW. Next. The result, they created excellent conditions for development in manufacturing and IT. They have highly educated young professionals graduating from major universities, University of Calgary, Mount Royal, SAIT, Ambrose, and St. Mary's. 5 major universities in a city that's not that big. That's why I say university students are lining up in hallways when a property goes for rent because they're sharing mattresses on floors in one single one-bedroom, multiple students. That's how bad it is. 3, Calgary became the world's 3rd and Canada's 1st most livable city. Pay attention to that. Winters in Calgary are punishing, but it's the 3rd most livable city in the world and the 1st in Canada. It's not Toronto. It's not Vancouver. That's what everybody thinks. It's Calgary with the worst winters. For some people, it's another planet in the winter, but yet it's the 3rd most livable. Wrap your head around how that's not supposed to make sense, but it's reality. and large number of high-paying jobs at the same time, the lowest unemployment rate in Canada. So this city has some of the harshest winters on the planet, beautiful summers, 4 distinct seasons, but harsh winters. And look, it's attracting people from places like Toronto and Vancouver and the rest of the world, and is the 3rd most livable across the planet. They are doing everything right. Next slide. More than 3,000 tech companies. That's a 233% increase in the past few years. Why are tech companies coming here? For the reasons I told you, and because the government is pro-business. You have a pro-business government who's pro-development, who fast-tracks building permits so they can build places for these companies to call home and employ people. Everything happens faster and more efficiently because the government has one goal, and that goal is being achieved. According to the report, the majority of tech firms in the province are in Calgary. Calgary alone, over the past 2 years, there's been a flurry of high productivity in the tech sector. From Benevity Inc. is an example, landing a $1.1 billion startup deal after a $50 million funding raise. That's a big money deal, and that's not the only one. It's just an example. Next slide. Calgary today. We talked about what got us to where we are. Let's talk about now. 1.4 million people and growing. Calgary citizens are young, median age 37 years old. So they have a young workforce that'll continue working for at least 18 more years. Their city will continue to boom. Calgary is the 3rd most diverse major city in Canada, 120 languages spoken in the city. Perfect example of the cultural mosaic that we have and we're known for is ripe and true there. Pro-business economy, friendly, low-tax business climate to promote growth. So if you want your population to increase, what gets people there? Employment. And not just any type of employment, quality, high-paying jobs. How do you attract companies to provide that employment? You lower taxes, create tax breaks, make it easy for them to build new places to house their employees and their businesses. Calgary, the government is doing all of this. And that's why it's the Calgary of today. Now, let's get back to why I've invested, why my colleagues have invested, why some of you have invested, and more of you will invest after this webinar. We're going to start talking about what makes it a fantastic place to invest and buy pre-construction, because pre-construction is the only thing to buy in real estate. We have the best returns. 1, no land transfer tax. That's instantaneously anywhere from a $20,000 to a $50,000 savings, anywhere on that for usual pre-con investment. No HST. Alberta favors landlords and investors. In Ontario, if your tenant stops paying you rent, it takes you 8 to 12 months to evict them. In Alberta, it takes you 14 to 28 days. 2 to 4 weeks as opposed to 8 to 12 months. Mind-blowing. When their lease is up in Alberta, their lease is up. You don't automatically inherit that tenant until they want to leave. That's what happens in Ontario now. And again, it is what it is. I still investor. I have many properties being built there, some currently being occupied, right? But it's ridiculous that when the lease is up, it's not up. You inherit that tenant until they want to leave. That doesn't happen in Alberta. When the lease is up, either negotiate a new lease or you're out. No rent control. It's your property. You saved up to buy it. You pay the debt to service it. Okay. You decide what you want for rent and affordability. With current interest rates, almost all the properties that we're going to show you after that are speculative in an essence, because you're buying something now that'll be ready in future, will be cash flow positive if they were built today and you rented it out. With the highest interest rates in the past 15 years, they are cash flow positive. Imagine when those rates come down. Imagine when the rents increase over time. Calgary rents have increased more than Toronto rents. Next slide. Oh, sorry, affordability. The vast majority of pre-construction product in Calgary is less than 50% that of Toronto. There you go. And with a deposit of only 10%, it's only 50% of purchase price. It's 50% of deposit, which works out to buying a unit in Calgary for less than 5% of a down payment here in Toronto. That's why a lot of people buy two for a 10% deposit Toronto prices. Next slide. Now, with all this development, a lot of public stuff is being built, and that's new event centers, new art centers, new sports centers. And this is just an example: the event center, NHL level arena, the BMO Center for Expansion, the Arts Common transformation, and the Foothills Fieldhouse. These are all examples. So major infrastructure projects are happening all the time in Calgary. Like I said, is booming. And what you're going to see if you go there, you're going to see construction, but it's not like Toronto. Okay, the city is spotless. The city is clean. It's not crowded. Yet there's a housing crisis. Okay, it's going to take some time for our minds to absorb that. It took for me, but all this is happening, and it is becoming better and better year over year. And we are catching it right when it's about to take off. Next slide. Nearly $5 billion future new green LRT line is being built in Calgary. So they have an LRT line there. It's kind of cool how it runs in the city and has its own street, okay? But it goes all over, and this line is currently being upgraded, extended, etc. But it's going to connect all four corners of Calgary. This is a $4 billion investment that's coming from all levels of government, including the federal level, the provincial, and the municipal level. And this is all happening, and a lot of these projects are connected to it. So remember when I always say that transit and density are always intertwined, and it's a chicken and the egg scenario? And when I was interviewed at the Ellis Dawn event last night, I talked about this. So it doesn't matter what came first, the chicken or the egg. And it doesn't matter what came first, the transit or the density. What matters is that they go hand in hand. And a lot of these projects are going to be near the LRT, and it's really an efficient way. It gets built a lot quicker than subways in Toronto, okay? Which, you know, the Coliseum got built faster than our subway. But anyways, $5 billion investment happening, and it's really to transport the increase in population and how the city is in urban sprawl right now. Next slide. Purchasing pre-construction. The differences with Toronto to Calgary, and there's significant differences. And they're in favor of Calgary, and I have to admit, and remember, I have to say a point that I'm not knocking Toronto. If you can afford Toronto, buy Toronto. But if you can't, it's a no-brainer by Calgary, because now people who can't afford Toronto are buying Calgary. And these are the reasons why. Toronto, high prices. The world knows we're the 10th most expensive city on the planet to buy real estate. It's 20% deposit, various fees and taxes. 25% of your pre-construction purchase price are development charges, taxes, and levies of multiple layers of government. And on top of that, you have land transfer tax. So 30% of your purchase price in Toronto for pre-construction is taxes. So Toronto is not affordable, it's unaffordable because of the government. So when you hear people say, oh, those greedy developers, I get offended by that. Not because I'm a developer, I wish I was, and maybe one day, hopefully. But the developers have profit margins of 8 to 12%. And if they go any lower, they can't get their financing. And when the developers don't get financing, they'll have to build with your money. And I'd much rather have my deposit insured in a lawyer's trust account than be funding a construction bill. So developers have the minimum amount of profit, and the government makes 3 to 4 times by doing nothing. And Toronto was also short $1 billion in their budget. I wonder why, but we won't get into that either. But that doesn't happen in Calgary, and that's one of the reasons why it's so affordable. But I guarantee you, in the next decade, we're going to see land transfer taxes and development charges. So get in now. There's a complicated contract. It's much longer here in Toronto, up to 60 pages, 50 to 60,000 in closing costs. That's your portion of the development charges and everything. Okay, plus land transfer. And the occupancy period might take up to several months. Now let's talk Calgary. Prices are less than half of Toronto's. Off the bat, you're spending 50%. 10% deposit as opposed to 20. That's right. Half the price, half the deposit works out to less than 5% of Toronto's. No land tax, transfer tax, that's no municipal sales tax, no development charges. Off the hop, it's 25% less expensive just there, okay? Simple pre-construction contract, it's a lot shorter. When we submit your worksheet and we upload it, because of the team that we work together with in Calgary, you are going to get your contract within minutes. Guaranteed rent by a lot of developers, minimal closing costs. All you have to pay is for your legals and a relatively quick occupation period. That's right, significantly quick. Occupancy periods in Toronto are lasting up to a year now because the city's so backlogged. Imagine. But they're short $1 billion. Anyways, next slide. Now, we talked about buying a property, a pre-construction property. Now we're going to talk about renting that property once built. And there's some major differences, like a similar level of difference that we just saw with purchasing, we're going to see in the rental aspect. And the rental aspect, if the only thing that really gets my goat here with buying in Toronto is the development charges and how greedy the government is and how they squander our tax dollars and then complain that they don't have any money. But what is almost worse than that, probably at par, is the landlord and tenant laws that are here in Ontario and Toronto. And it really handcuffs it. And I personally think it has a negative impact on rental, because if they weren't so bad, I think a lot of more people would convert their homes and rent out parts of their home, which would do a lot to ease the housing crisis. But next slide, let's talk about the comparison. Calgary, there is no rent control. You decide what you want to rent your property for, and then if it doesn't rent out, it's because you put too high of a cost, too high of a price. The market always decides pricing. The government never. The government can't control pricing with regulation. They can't control the climate with a tax. I had to throw that in there, okay? And they can't control inflation with interest rate hikes. Statistically, I'm right on all counts. But especially rent. The market decides the rent, because if someone's willing to pay for it, you should be willing to ask for it. And I'm 100% stand behind that. And it is what it is. But in Calgary, you can do it. In Toronto, you can't. No automatic contract extension. I talked about this earlier. When your contract is done, you don't inherit, essentially adopt your tenant and they become part of your family until they want to leave. You know, the contract's up. You need to negotiate a new one or find other accommodations. And this gives you more freedom as a landlord to own or occupy it, to sell it vacant, which is really the only way to sell it, et cetera, et cetera. An easy and quick eviction process. This is huge. Remember, 14 to 28 days to evict someone, not months. Legal to add a no pets condition in your contract. I am a dog owner. My puppy is next to me. But I should have a right to tell people if they can have a pet in my rental or not. I believe that's your right as the person that saved up to buy the unit, as the person that maintains the unit, and as the person that services the debt load. You can't put that here. Alberta is known to be a landlord paradise for the above. And one other thing, a damage deposit. You are allowed legally to request a damage deposit that will be refunded if there is damage to the unit. And I believe that's fair. Everything there, I believe, is fair. And I believe you guys think the same thing. And finally, we have a place in Canada that allows it and is governing based on logic. Now, Toronto, where I was born and raised, Rent control for condos built before 2018, I do not think that's fair. Rent increase was less than half of inflation. I know that I can charge whatever I want for rent because the condos I'm currently renting are newer than 2018. But I know I'm short thousands with current mortgage rates. And that's with the ability to increase my rents. Automatic contract extension. Like I said, at the end of the 12-month lease, the lease gets naturally extended. Why? You can't cancel the lease. You can't ask them to leave. You can, but they don't have to, right? So basically, you're at the mercy of the tenant. Eviction process is a time-consuming and difficult. That is an understatement. It is torture. And with current interest rates and mortgage rates, it can crush someone and ruin their family's livelihood. 8 to 12 months. It's illegal to make a no pets condition. I don't think that's fair. And a damage deposit is also illegal. So you can't put a no pets condition and you can't get a damage deposit. What can you get? It's not looking good for Toronto in comparison. One's a landlord paradise, one's a landlord purgatory. And I hate to be so dramatic, but the points don't lie. Now, let's talk about some exciting projects. Now, we're called First Access Condos, so I'm going to talk about 2 exciting condo projects. But then I'm going to also briefly introduce 2 house projects, low-rise projects. One's a townhouse, one's semis and detached. In Calgary, semis are called duplexes. There's a cheat note, okay? So we're going to talk about some great projects that we are selling. We're also going to talk about right now, next slide, these guys. So Truman Developments has been in the business for over 35 years. They have a fantastic Google rating of over 4.2, 11,000 plus reviews. They do everything fantastically. I had the pleasure of meeting Oliver. Okay, he's one of the sons. It's a father and 2 sons that have run the business currently. Okay, he's one of the sons. He's basically very, very hands-on. And I was at their head office in September, shaking hands, getting to know each other, getting acquainted, finalizing First Access Condos relationship with them before we did a really big push. We wanted to know that we were working with the best in Calgary. They are by far the most prolific developer that builds the best product, okay? And they have the best pipeline. So we have sold some other projects, but their pipelines were limited and there was no point in focusing on them. So First Access Condos likes to look at the future. And the future, at least for the next few years, is 100% Truman. So that's why it's a pleasure that we have announced our partnership with them. Now, this launched yesterday. This is Mine Condos. And the vast majority, almost all condos in the suburbs of Calgary are these shorter little low-rise buildings of about 4 stories, okay? Mine is one such building. Now, what I didn't mention earlier is that Calgary is an Airbnb-friendly city. Unlike Toronto, where you have to own or occupy your unit and it's your primary residence and you can only Airbnb that. Calgary, you can Airbnb anything. And one of the reasons is because the housing crisis is so brutal. It is on a different level, okay? One of our team members moved to Calgary and she was in an Airbnb. She was at one of her friends out west in another city, took 2 months searching for a unit, couldn't find one, said, screw it, I'm gonna go boots on the ground, I'm gonna find something. She was in an Airbnb for 5.5 weeks. So luckily, I found her a unit to rent because it just became available because the building just said, no Airbnbs for our specific building. And she took this place unseen. I called her from a conference in Vancouver where I was working out next to this realtor, okay? We ended up becoming buddies. And he goes, I have a place for rent. Do you know anybody? But just by chance. And I told him I was selling Calgary. And I called her, I said, and the only question she asked was, is there underground parking? That's it. She goes, I'll take it. Didn't hassle on the price, didn't ask for the condition of the unit, didn't ask anything. I'll take it. So imagine that someone in the industry jumps on a unit that quickly just by getting one. That's what it is. So this project mine is located in Northeast Calgary, and it's really, really close to the airport. Okay, but that's fantastic. And why is it fantastic? For Airbnb purposes, this is the perfect unit to get. That's right, the perfect unit, and it's allowable to Airbnb. There's also rental guarantees and all that if you want to do it the more traditional route, okay? And that's all offered by Truman, best developer in Calgary. But we have a project right here, mine launched yesterday. Majority is 2 and 3 bedrooms, starting from the high 300s, okay? A couple 1 bedrooms in the low 300s, mid to high 300s, that is. Some 1 bedrooms in the low 300s, but for 10% down, and this is my big push. If there's 2 bedrooms available and they're an extra $5,000 only over the next 3 years, why not do it and go the bigger unit? And remember, housing shortage, best opportunity to buy an area that's booming like Northeast Calgary, great for Airbnb potential as well. 2 towers, 5 stories, over 200 suites, Northeast Calgary, Cornerstone community, direct access to major highways, the airport, entertainment, and retail. Remember, I was there less than a month ago, drove around the whole city. The area is characterized by its wide tree-lined streets, well-maintained parks, thoughtfully planned green spaces, ample opportunities for outdoor activities and recreation. Calgary has a lot of parks and is really outdoor focused, okay? This is one such area. I was personally there. I checked out the site. Great opportunity for you guys to buy. And it's starting from the mid 300s, and that's 2 bedrooms. This is showing us where it's located, okay? When we send this to you and you blow it up, this is just showing of everything that's around there, okay? There's restaurants, there's shopping, everything you need. There's great little ponds and rivers, great parks, everything you need. 15-minute drive from downtown Calgary. When you say the suburbs in Calgary, it's not Calgary is an hour away from like Calgary. Okay, we like to joke and say Toronto's an hour away from Toronto. And the reality is, when I was doing a video in Banff, I cracked a joke that made the person filming it laugh. And I said, it took us less time to drive from Calgary to Banff than it did for me to drive from Toronto to Mississauga last week. And that was the truth. So Calgary, the suburbs for Calgary is not far. Okay, you can get to the city center in less than 20 minutes. Maintenance fees are very similar. I just saw a question. They're very similar to Toronto. Okay, and when we send out the package to you, just register. You'll have everything in that package. Now, I talked to you about an entry-level project. I talked to you about something in the suburbs. Now I'm going to talk to you about the best. We're doing the tale of 2 projects here. Imperia, launched earlier this year, over 75% sold, some great suites still available, still opening day prices, okay? Oliver and his family did not raise prices. They want to get this out. They want to build this. They want to get and build the best, most luxurious building in Calgary and have it ready in less than the next 5 years. And this is it. It's downtown Calgary, at the corner of 11th and 4th Street, great area, walking distance to Eau Claire, very close to Beltline. Those are 2 most happening neighborhoods. It's kind of nestled in between. It's in the financial district, okay? This is the building. It's a flagship project. So this is Truman basically saying, this is what I can do. And that's the building. And this project is starting in the mid 400s for a nice size 1 bedroom. Okay, not many units left. Some 2 bedrooms get up to the 600s, but think about that in comparison to what you're getting. So in this project was transported into Toronto. That 1 bedroom would be $900,000. That 2 bedroom would be 1.2 million. You're getting this for half the price. But rents in the city are close to 65, 70% of Toronto's. See how you get cash flow positive? So this flagship project is in downtown Calgary with 11 on-site amenities, high bike and walk score, easy access to transportation routes, and public transit. Perfectly desirable downtown location, steps to trendy cafes, upscale restaurants, boutique shopping, everything that you need that's higher end is within walking distance. This is a map right here, okay? And as you can see, up top by the Bow River is an area called Eau Claire. I walked from Eau Claire to the Imperia site in about 12 minutes. And I wasn't speed walking. I was with a colleague and she was wearing a little bit of a heel, so there was no running, okay? That was 12 minutes, not even, more like 8 to 10. That's really nice area, Eau Claire. And to the left is Beltline. That's happening, bars, little restaurants and everything. And that's about a 6 to 7 minute walk as well, 8-minute walk. So although it looks like it's far from those two areas, and those are really the two areas that people talk about in Calgary, it's situated right in the heart of downtown, right in the heart of the financial district, okay? And it's right there, and it's surrounded by all the best restaurants, all the best shopping, everything that is Calgary at its finest is right there. And I beg you to find another city that has a great little strip of nature, like along the Bow River in Canada. And I know there's Stanley Park and all that stuff, but this is right up there. And that's what it is to be Calgary. Now, let's talk about these amenities. Outdoor patio, lounge, and resting area, a barbecue lounge, an exercise room, outdoor fitness, as well as indoor fitness, a gamer lounge, because a lot of people play games, video games nowadays. It's not just for kids anymore. I'm actually, if my kids accomplish what the task that was given to them, I'm going to get a PS5 and play FIFA with them in the winter or on rainy days. Vault lounge, that's billiards, bar, seating area, an upper vault, that's a second level bar. Okay. It's not just a building, it's a community. There's obviously a pet spa and a dog run and a media lounge. So all these things and more are amenities at this building. So remember, there is always a market for the best. That's why Lamborghini and Ferrari have waiting lists that last years. This is not that much more expensive than an entry-level project, except it's the best. And you're going to see a market for this. And I believe that the returns on this project specifically will blow your mind. Because not only is it the best, but it's so much better than everything else. Okay. This talks about the connectivity. I can't really read it, but it's really close to LRTs. I've seen it, really close to highways. And like I told you, commuting in Calgary is nowhere near what it's like in Toronto. Now, this is a great skyline pic facing north. Okay. Look at the Calgary skyline. Until you've been to Calgary and are driving into the city, you have no idea what to expect. And you are so pleasantly surprised that this is popping out from the prairies. And it's incredible. And it's organized. And the streets make sense. And they're perfectly straight. And on a grid system. And everything that needs to be done was done. And look at how beautiful that building's going to be in the center of it all. Now, mine in Imperia, mine just started selling. But this is going to go really quickly because of the location and the price point. They also have some great incentives, okay? There's some parking and locker incentives. Reach out to us. You might be pleasantly surprised and see some things are free, okay? I don't want to give away too much information. And that's with the 10% deposit. Now, listen, a lot of the Truman projects have a differentiated deposit structure. There's 5, 10, 15, 20. The more you put down, the greater the deal. But at 10%, the amount of incentives and extra stuff that you get is mind-blowing. And that's only 10% down. Okay, so I'm saying, I talked about 10%, stick to the 10%, and you'll be blown away. Now we're going to talk about another project in Southeast Calgary. So we talked about Northeast. Now we're going to talk about Southeast. Okay, and that's called Orson. Again, 3 buildings, 287 suites, starting from the 300s. They still have some availability. If you guys Google or you've been to Calgary and you want Southeast as opposed to Northeast, act quickly. We have a handful of units left at Orson, but we're going to sell them. Get them before they're sold out if you are prone to Southeast as opposed to Northeast. Okay. Now, I know we're first access condos, and I know here in the GTA, we don't really touch low-rise housing. But like I told you, I have townhomes in Northeast Calgary, and we got semis and detached in Southeast Calgary. The towns are from the 500s. The houses with mountain views are from the 6s. Less than half the price of Toronto. Again, that's our theme. Now absorb all that, and remember, there's a significant, bold call to action here. Projects I told you have been selling, just literally started selling, and they are in limited supply. These aren't 900 unit projects like Toronto, 300 units, 200 units, etc., etc. People from all over are starting to buy up Calgary. No development charges, no land transfer tax, half the deposit structure, booming economy, #1 real estate market in the country last year, and going only in that direction. Do not delay. Reach out to us, info@firstaccesscondos.com, or call us, speak to Ashley, and secure your unit. And most importantly, there's a 10-day cooling off period, just like Toronto. So that is when you ask your questions. Lock in these units now. Don't come 2 weeks from now and say, oh, I was doing this or I was doing that, but I want this unit that no longer exists. Because the one thing we know about pre-con is the next project is always more expensive than the current one. Now, most importantly, you've heard me talk about why and how and what kind of returns we're going to make. I didn't bring that up yet because now I'm going to show you. Let's go. Selling the property before closing, the 4-year strategy. So that's when it's finally ready, you're going to sell it. Now, purchase price $360,000, and we said we can pick up a 2-bedroom around that price in Northeast Calgary at Mine Condos. Your 10% deposit's only $36,000. That's not even 5% for Toronto. Market value and occupancy, $460,000. That's a 6% appreciation per year. And Calgary, on average, was appreciating near 10% last year, while the rest of the country was tanking. Imagine when interest rates come down. Imagine. And they're coming down. Nobody email me, text message me, or call me and repeat what the media has said, okay, how they're going to be higher for longer. Not going to happen. Statistically, that didn't happen in the past. It's not going to happen for now, okay? Those appreciation numbers are highly conservative at 6%. Expect a minimum of 10 to 12% appreciation year over year moving forward. Profit before sale, $100,000. Cost of sale, that's developer exit fee. And what is that? The developer lists it and sells it for you, and he charges you one side of the transaction, okay? Profit after sale, $88,500. Return on investment is 245% gross. That's a 61% year over year return. And Toronto, at the peak of our market, we were generating 50% returns year over year. And that was from 2016 to 2021. Selling the property after 2 years guaranteed rent. Now, for a developer to guarantee your rent, they have researched this to death. And they know that rents will be higher than what they're offering. But having guaranteed rent gives you peace of mind. And sleeping well at night when you invest with me is my goal. So again, let's knock off the start. $360,000 purchase price. Mine Condos, 2-bedroom. Let that sink in. Pre-construction deposit, 10%. That's $36,000 down. 6% appreciation. It's going to be more, but let's say 6% because when we invest money, we're conservative. So we want to be pleasantly surprised, not disappointed. And you're never going to get disappointed with First Access Condos. $460,000. Closing cost, $2,000. That's legals. That's the only closing cost. Total purchase price, $362,000. Mortgage, 3%, which will be even lower mortgage rates by the time these are ready. Okay, $1,366. A maintenance fee of $300 per month. $170 per month taxes, 30 insurance, 200 utility, monthly expenses, $2,066. This is with the guaranteed rent. 21 year guaranteed rent. Cash flow in 2 years, $1,320. Principal paid by tenant, $13,735. Price after 4 years of construction and 2 years guaranteed rent, $510,000. Profits before sale, $187,000. Developer exit fee option, $25,500. Profit after sale, $161,820. That's a 75% per year or 450% gross return on your investment. Let me repeat that. 450% gross return on your deposit, which is 75% per year with conservative estimates. Now, how are these numbers so high? I'll tell you why. 10% down is half of 20% down, which means the return is doubled percentage-wise because you're putting half the money. Isn't that amazing? Next slide. Today, people who hold cash equivalents feel comfortable. They should not. They have opted for a terrible long-term asset, one that pays virtually nothing and is certain to depreciate in value. You want to get an asset that will increase in value. And what's increased in value since the start of recorded time? Real estate. Real estate has created more millionaires than any other asset class in history and will continue to do so. We are about to see the largest transfer of wealth in the next 10 years in our country's history, and be part of it. And if you can't buy in Toronto, buy in Calgary. Do yourself the favor. Why did I buy in Calgary? Why are my colleagues buying in Calgary? This is our lives. We dream and have nightmares about condos, and we're buying condos here, which means we've done the research for you. Trust me. Another Warren Buffett quote, end this. When people are cautious, be greedy. And when people are greedy, be cautious. Right now, people across the country are cautious. It's the time to be greedy, but be smart and greedy. Be smart and invest in a market that's on its way up, not a market that's leveling off, and not a market that's getting so expensive that very few people can buy because it decreases your buyer pool. And that is why Calgary is the buy for 2023 and 2024 in our country. And it's opening the doors to a lot of you that thought you couldn't buy real estate to get in and become a real estate investor.